We're going to be talking about the mouth and some other things, so some stuff to think about while we're going through this. Why do we have saliva? Where do we get our saliva from? What are our different teeth and sort of what are they used for? What causes cavities? What is the anatomy of the mouth? What are the different parts? What is the anatomy of a tooth? And how do we swallow and what's involved when we do swallow? So the mouth, you have three pairs of these salivary glands, which secrete what's referred to as salivary amylase. And amylase starts breaking down carbohydrates. It starts breaking down starch and turning it into more basic sugars. So like if you've ever taken a cracker, I don't know why you would have done this. If you've ever taken a cracker and just let it sit in your mouth for a long period of time, you'll notice that eventually it starts to taste sweet. It's because there's lots of starches in that cracker that your salivary amylase is breaking down into sugars. The next component is the tonsils at the back of your mouth, which people used to get tonsillectomies, or what are called tonsillectomies, where their tonsils were removed all the time. That's a less common thing, but when those become inflamed, it's really not great for you. Not when they get inflamed, but when they stay inflamed, it's not good for you. Those tonsils are really important for fighting disease, and again, part of your lymphatic tissues. So inside your mouth, you have teeth, which really start the process. The salivary amylase in your teeth really start the process of digestion or breaking your food down. And you have a tongue, which is a bunch of taste buds, so you can kind of identify what sorts of things you're eating. You know, does it taste bad? Is it going to be bad for me? And it also is assisting in the mechanical breakdown of food, just because it's helping you to sort of maneuver it and move it around. So after you've chewed up your food, it's referred to as bolus. And after it moves out of your mouth, it moves into the pharynx. So toward the anterior, the forward end of your mouth, the anterior end, which is a good word to know, you have the hard palate, and toward the posterior end, you have the soft palate. So hard palate up here toward the front, soft palate back there. The hard palate is made of several bones, and the soft palate is mostly muscle. Actually, no, it's not mostly muscle, it is entirely muscle. And the soft palate ends in your uvula back here. So on the sides of the back of your mouth, you have your tonsils. And you also have these teeth. So you have these like chisel-shaped incisors for biting things. Then you have these pointy canines. You have these pointy canines, which are for tearing things. Then you have premolars, which are reasonably flat. They're to start crushing your food up. Your premolars and your molars are for crushing food. So you have 32 teeth as an adult, and you have 20 what are referred to as deciduous teeth, because they come out when you're a baby, being replaced by your adult teeth. Again, they're used for the mechanical breakdown of food, and each tooth is composed of a crown and a root, and a hard covering of enamel and dentin, which covers the crown. So that root is that inner pulp area that has nerves and blood vessels brought to it. And cavities, which is one of the points to consider or things to think about, are when bacteria metabolize sugar, they produce acids. So when bacteria metabolize sugar, they produce these acids, which actually cause your teeth, the enamel in your teeth, to start breaking down, leading to a cavity, also called a dental carie. So this outer layer, this is what you see when you look at teeth, is called enamel. It's part of the crown, and then you have this dentin layer here, and then you have pulp in here. So if a cavity actually gets through the enamel, past the dentin, and into the pulp, you have to have what's called a root canal. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to kill away anything that's left in here, because it's probably filled up with bacteria by the time this has been pierced. It's probably dead anyway, or close to it. and they're going to replace it with like some kind of biodynamic or biocompatible like rubber stuff. So the main things I want you to know here are this enamel, dentin, pulp, and these are your gums. So you also have several salivary glands inside your mouth, and again, this is starting the process of digestion by beginning to break down starches into sugars, and sometimes it's breaking down sugars into even simpler sugars. So beyond the mouth, you have the pharynx, which is the space between the mouth and the esophagus that serves as a passageway for food and air. And then you have the esophagus, which is the next region that food is going to travel down. So it's going to travel from your mouth through the esophagus into your stomach. So, oops, looks like the resolution of this messed these up. So don't worry about these things, but just know, beyond your soft palate begins the pharynx, and then down here is your esophagus. So you have your nasopharynx up here, naso referring to nose, and then your pharynx is just down here. You don't need to know like laryngopharynx or anything like that. Just this is your pharynx. So when you swallow food, you have a voluntary phase, which, is voluntary. You can decide that you actually want to swallow something. But once the food gets to the pharynx, it becomes a reflex, and you don't have control over it anymore. So at that point, like you don't think about moving your epiglottis, right? You don't think about moving your epiglottis so that food doesn't get into your trachea, do you? So it's this involuntary movement where your epiglottis is going to cover your voice box, making sure food goes down your esophagus, and then food moves down through peristalsis, which I mentioned before, and it's this wave-like rhythmic contraction, making sure that everything is moving in one direction. So you can see here, this might be a little bit confusing, but basically this region here is where air is going to go. This is where air is going to go. And when you start to swallow, you have this little flap here that closes off this glottis region, and this is called the epiglottis. The epiglottis closes off the glottis and makes sure that food just goes down into your stomach. The bolus just goes into your stomach. And actually, if food does wind up in the trachea, or water winds up in the trachea, you wind up coughing. You wind up coughing to make sure that nothing goes into your lungs.